Can everybody hear me? Have I got everything fixed? Great. I know that many of you were expecting Chris Christopherson today, so for me, this is an unexpected pleasure to be standing in for him because very sadly he has COVID. For you, it's probably just unexpected. I'm going to be talking about creating a positive school culture. But as I go through the slides this morning, I hope that many of you will realise that what I'm saying about school culture actually applies to culture everywhere, in families, in organisations, at work, and so on. So what is school culture, or what is culture? And very simply, it's the way we do things around here. It's what people are expected to do by others. And sometimes when you enter a new school or a new workplace, it's quite difficult to start off with, to work out what's expected, because what's expected isn't necessarily written in any rule books. It's what's considered acceptable or not acceptable. Is it okay to ask for help, for instance? In one school in which I did some research in Australia, one of the teachers said to me, "It's not acceptable in this school to badmouth the kids. Nobody says negative things about our students." And I thought that was a pretty major thing to be saying, because it's certainly not true in many other schools. It's not just about policies, it's about values. It's about what people believe, and I'm going to talk more about belief. It's the words that people say, and it's the things that people do. And although it's led from the top, and there's a lot around the importance of leadership, it's not always the top that determines what happens. It's developed by the conversations that we have. For me, culture is created by conversations. And in the end, it's how people feel about coming to school, whether or not they want to jump up in the morning or Monday morning to go there. And I know schools where that happens, and I know schools where people are in the doldrums on a Monday morning. Adrian Bethune has been very kind to let me share his wonderful little video about can schools make you happy? And I'm going to show that now. Somebody can... That's it, thank you.
When you ask parents what they most want for their children, the answer is usually, I want them to be happy. They want their children to grow up feeling content, to enjoy a meaningful life, and having the inner resources to handle life's ups and downs. As Aristotle said, happiness is the meaning of life, the whole aim and end of human existence. So what role do schools currently play in nurturing happiness? Are they the bastions of human flourishing? Well, not necessarily. Our modern education system has become obsessed with assessment, as if by weighing the pig you somehow make it fatter, when in reality you just annoy the pig. There is a danger that by fixating on results, we fail to teach children that learning is its own reward. All the while, our children appear to be getting less happy. There's been a significant decrease in children's life satisfaction over the last 10 years, and rates of mental ill health have been climbing steeply too. And teachers are not faring any better, as they suffer from rising rates of stress, anxiety and depression at levels much higher than the national average. All the signs are of a system that needs to change. But it doesn't have to be this way, because the simple fact is, happier children learn better. Research shows that schools that put in place whole school programs to develop children's social and emotional skills show improvements in behaviour, in attendance, and academic attainment. In one study with over 7,000 students, where they were taught about developing positive relationships, mindfulness, physical activity and acts of kindness, they not only showed a large increase in their levels of well-being, but their exam scores increased by 20%. And it's no surprise that happier teachers teach better. When schools develop and look after their staff, they're less likely to get ill, take time off work, or leave the profession. Happiness turns on brains for teaching and learning, or as psychologist Sean Aker puts it, the positive brain has a biological advantage over the negative or neutral brain. But more important than test scores, it turns out that happiness in childhood is the strongest predictor of happiness in adulthood. In fact, longitudinal data showed that a child's emotional health was significantly more important than all the qualifications a person ever obtains. And teachers have a major impact on children's happiness whilst at school. We have an opportunity to stop and rethink the purpose of education. When schools invest in the happiness and well-being of their communities, they help grow happier people who are kinder to others, have stronger relationships, are healthier and better learners. There are no downsides to children and teachers being happier. It's time we put well-being at the heart of schools. When you ask parents...
I was involved a number of years ago with the federal scoping study on approaches to school and student wellbeing in Australia. And we found that when wellbeing was at the heart of a school's endeavours, several things happened. There was better mental health and resilience. There was a stronger sense of belonging. People were nicer to each other. There was better pro-social behaviour. Teachers liked being at those schools. And because the kids were happier to be in school, as the video has just shown, they were more engaged with learning and academic outcomes improved. For me, this is such a no-brainer, and I don't know why all schools aren't taking this on board. I was delighted to meet at this conference a couple of people that I used to teach when I was at the University of Western Sydney on the school counselling course. It was a real thrill for me to do that and to see where their lives have gone in the last 15 years. It was just wonderful. And one of the things I did while I was working at UWS, now known as WSU, they've changed the words around, was I asked them what facilitated wellbeing in schools, what did they think, and what undermined wellbeing in schools. Now, because we're at a positive conference here, I have left out what undermines wellbeing and just stuck to the wellbeing facilitators. And the first thing was a focus on the whole child within the whole school. Every part of a child, all their domains of development, everything about them matters, not just whether or not they're academic stars. And within the whole school, this is not something that happens in silos, it happens across the whole school. And it involves very often, or it begins with teachers, with leaders, school leaders, who have passion for the whole child, who have a vision of where their school is going to be. And I sometimes do training on social and emotional learning with groups of people, and I say, do you know what the vision of your school leader is for their school? And I am astonished that many of them don't know what their leader's vision is. They don't know where that school is heading. But they also need courage, because as the video showed, there are certainly some schools and there are some countries where to say well-being needs to be at the heart of what you're doing is not necessarily aligned with government policies on education. So it sometimes takes courage to stand up for those things. It's about what is proactive, universal, rather than what is reactive to problems. It involves training for staff, and it's about looking at where you want to go, not picking up and focusing on the problems. And although it comes in last on this slide, the focus on teacher well-being has to be central. You know that saying in planes, many of you will have flown here, where they say, put on your own oxygen mask before you help others. And it's the same in schools. Teachers whose well-being is under the carpet actually can't teach well, don't relate well, have knee-jerk reactions to young people who are vulnerable, whose behaviour is challenging, and who need to feel connected to school. Bronfenbrenner ecological model is one that's come up a number of times in this conference, and I've used it a lot in my work. And although that's probably difficult to see all of it there, but it's basically about how different parts of the system are connected to each other. And at the last circle, you've got the macro level of the socio-political demands on schools that affect all the different levels, right to what happens for the individuals there. The micro level is the individual, the exo level is the interpersonal, the meso level is the organisational, and the macro level is the social-political. What happens is that each part of that impacts on the other parts. And it's never linear. Not one thing happens and another thing happens as a result of that one thing. It's about things going backwards and forwards over time. What conversations happen in the staff room impact on the way children are seen and what happens in the classroom. It's the same as I said about teachers not bad-mouthing children, not saying negative things about students. That means that it's much more difficult to stereotype or label or position students in a negative way. And the influence is bi-directional. And although leaders have a huge influence on what happens to the culture of school, what is important is that the voices of teachers also matters. Now, what often happens is that well-being is looked at in silos. Lots of things happen in silos, so that you get, a focus on this initiative, and then you get a focus on another initiative, then you get a focus perhaps on teacher well-being. What often happens is that people aren't quite sure what they're doing, and I certainly know that one of the things that's getting in the way of teacher well-being in the UK is the huge number of initiatives that are taking place. They start to get involved in something, teachers, and then something else comes on, and they're thinking, where do I get all the time to do all of this, and at least do it well? So over time, I have developed a framework of principles that apply to everything that goes on in a school. Now, it started off, these principles, as a pedagogy for social and emotional learning, because I realised, doing social and emotional learning quite a lot, is that it's not just the content that matters, it's how it is taught that matters, because it wasn't often a safe, strengths-based, solution-focused approach in schools, and sometimes teachers were finding themselves dealing with difficult emotions and children themselves dealing with some difficulties, and not having the skills or the training or the time to respond effectively to those kids. And I found that those principles actually apply to so many other things. And ASPIRE stands for, it's an acronym, it stands for agency, safety, positivity, inclusion, respect, and equity. And I'm just going to touch on those in the next little while. And I hope as we go through, again, you can see how it applies not just to developing school culture, but developing culture anywhere. Agency is a lot about what Richard Ryan talks about self-determination, and it's about empowerment. It's feeling and it's making sure that people have a voice in what happens, that they have a choice. And for me, for those kids who are vulnerable, who often have hard things happen to them at home, and then they go to school and their behaviour reflects the tough times they've been having. And they have a hard time at school because people don't like them and because they can't settle to learning. And for me, I call them double whammy kids. And what happens to those kids in schools, for me, is a social justice issue. We need to make sure that we're thinking differently about those kids who are vulnerable and challenging. I spent most of my first career being a teacher of such children, youngsters who got behavioural, social and emotional difficulties. It's about being given responsibility. If you give someone agency and saying, I'm not controlling you, but you have responsibility for making those decisions, it's much harder then to turn around and blame somebody else when things goes wrong. For teachers, it's being given the chance to contribute to policy decisions. And in a piece of research that I did in Australian schools, a teacher said to me in an interview, she said, I know that the school executive have to make the decisions, the final decisions about things. But if I feel that I've been authentically consulted, even if I don't fully agree with them, I'll go along with them. If I feel they've just been imposed on me, then I'm much less likely to, give my all to these decisions. I might even undermine them and not be the best teacher there. The opposite of control, the opposite of agency is control. And in a healthy relationship, control is toxic. So even when somebody's in a position of authority, the way they are with other people, like being in charge of situations but not trying to control other people, then that actually makes a big difference to the culture in a school and wherever else. For students, it's about taking responsibility for things like developing the guidelines or the rules in the school. What values do they want to see? How do they include everybody else? Asking them to make those important decisions. Safety is, we all need to feel safe when we are at a workplace or in a school or in a relationship. We need to feel physically safe, that we're not going to be hurt, psychologically safe, that we're not going to be put down, and emotionally safe, that it's actually we're not going to feel terrible bit by bit by being there. And this includes, there are many, many other things that we can say for each of these principles, but they include making mistakes is fine. Perfection, aiming for perfection, is really problematic in our schools. There's a lot of kids who actually are comparing themselves with other people all the time and finding themselves falling short in some way. So we need to accept and embrace imperfection in all of us. And teachers making mistakes and acknowledging those mistakes is one thing that really helps there. I think it's important to reduce individual competition. Now, it's hard because in many schools, competition is threaded throughout whatever happens. But actually, it means that only a few people can be at the top of a class. And there's a lot of people who think of themselves as losers or think that it's not worth trying. I was involved in a co-counselling session at one point in my life with a young man who was in that counselling session because he was very depressed, and he was depressed because in this school he was in, people were graded, something else that I don't think is a good idea at all. And last year he was second in the class, and this year he was fourth. So he was seriously depressed. And I thought, what are we doing to our children if that's the way they're actually thinking about their lives in school? It's about being able to ask for help and not being put down if you do. And I know that where there is high social capital, teachers and students are much more able to ask for the help that they need. And they are more resilient, and they're able to be more vulnerable. They are more relaxed, but they're also able to be more energized. And I think that's really interesting. You need to think that other people have your best interests at heart. In a safe relationship, that's what the expectation will be. And for those young people who've experienced difficulties, might not feel safe anywhere. And I know, and probably many of us know, because of what happened in the pandemic, is that children who were quite vulnerable lost their access to teachers who believed in them, who rated them, who were there to support them. And schools, we know, can be a place that is the most secure, predictable, inclusive, and kind place in a child's life. And teachers make a huge difference to those kids. P is for positivity. And we know that positive feelings enhance learning. If you're happy around things, then you're much more engaged with what you're doing. We know that positive words can enhance resilience. I think you can do this, and I'll help you get there. And a positive sense of self, using strengths-based language and not telling kids that they're naughty or they're lazy or anything like that, let alone those psychiatric disorders of conduct control. Positive attitudes create hope and optimism and looking at what we have in common with each other. And positive actions build a sense of us all being in this together. By the way, going back to positive and negative words, a colleague of mine, Maggie McClure, did a piece of research looking at the impact of what happens when a child comes to school and he gets labelled as naughty, because that label sticks and other people reinforce that label and parents at the school gates reinforce that label. And then it goes along with that young man or the young woman as they go through school. And using other language, and I don't have to tell an audience like this about the importance of strengths-based language, saying to that young person, do you know you're so energetic, that's great, and then thinking about ways to actually channel that energy, right? I can see that you are becoming more responsible. Give children something to live up to, not to live down to. I could say a great deal about having fun in schools, and one of the things that students say is that they really value teachers who try and make learning fun in some way or another. And for me, childhood needs to be about enjoyment of life, about having fun. Not all learning has to be serious, and for me, the better learning is inclusive, collaborative learning, not competitive learning. Positive emotions not only enhance learning, they build other things across the culture. So if you feel valued and people acknowledge what you do and thank you for it, you're much more likely to be cooperative with those people who value you. If you feel somebody is caring about you, doing slightly little things like saying, how are you this morning? Smiling. It's the little things that matter. Then that person will start to have a little bit more understanding and compassion for others. And I know that if you constantly treat particularly students with respect, then they are more likely to listen to you, perhaps when you have something more difficult to say. If you're included by a group, you're going to be much more committed to be part of that group and to be motivated by what they're doing. And we know that having fun together produces oxytocin into our bodies, and that fosters belonging, care, trust, togetherness, and relieves stress. It's really good to have a bit of a laugh together every day if possible. And we know that belonging is one of the major factors for resilience. And it impacts on learning. The I in aspire is for inclusion, the importance of feeling you belong. Now, there are two sorts of belonging. There's exclusive belonging, and that's really quite good, or can be quite good, for those people within that group, because it's about me and my gang. And what happens is that other people outside the gang are not as good as those people inside the gang, and you see that everywhere. When you have exclusive belonging, it fosters inhumanity, because you see other people as it rather than a person, rather than that shared humanity. It can lead to racism, it can lead to homophobia, it can lead to nationalism that's quite negative because it's anti-other people. Okay? Inclusive belonging is open to all. It values diversity as well as everybody being wonderfully unique. And the research on school belonging has been quite interesting, because it says that in order to feel that you belong in school, you have to not only feel valued, you also need to see yourself making progress in your learning. Otherwise, school doesn't have meaning for you. So seeing yourself making progress in however small a way. If you're constantly in competition with other people, then you feel that it's not worth bothering because you can't match up to others. So the idea for me of personal bests is a good one. So you're always competing against yourself. And I've seen schools do that, and it's a really valuable initiative. Isaac Prylotensky has written some wonderful things on well-being, looking at the individual and the organisational and the community. And one of his recent papers was a paper on mattering. And he said that it was the importance of mattering was not only being valued, but also being able to add value and knowing that you can add value so that you have a way of participating and having that role acknowledged. Respect is the R in aspire, and it's respect for individuals and what's happening for them, but also for culture. I was involved in writing a chapter for a book on social and emotional learning in Australia and the Asia Pacific. And we wrote mostly about our work with Aboriginal communities. And when we delivered the draft, we had some feedback from the editors who said, but you haven't mentioned CASEL and the CASEL model, the Collaborative for Academic, Social and Emotional Learning in the States. And we said, CASEL is about individual skill development, very largely, and we've been working with a collective culture. So individual skills are not as important as what we all do together. And I think that's sometimes not always acknowledged, how important it is to realise that there are other ways of thinking about things. It's about active listening. Respect is about listening to what other people say and not saying, that doesn't matter, that's not important, this is what you need to do. Not minimising what other people say or what they feel. And for me, a lot of respect is about the golden rule. Very simple, treating others as you would have them treat you. And Barack Obama talks about the golden rule in The Audacity of Hope, the book that he wrote in 2006. The golden rule is not simply a call to sympathy or charity, but more demanding. A call to stand in someone else's shoes and see through their eyes. After all, if others are like us, then their struggles are our own. And if we fail to help, we diminish ourselves. No one is exempt from the call to find common good. And for me, that sums up a lot of what we've been talking about in creating the world we want to live in, to try and move our thinking from what is good for me to what is good for we, for us, for all of us, for the common good. The E in Aspire used to be for equality, because equality is a factor underpinning societal well-being. We know that the less distance between the haves and the have-nots in any country means there's more well-being in that country, because fairness is so important to well-being. But if you treat everyone the same, it doesn't respect either diversity or what's fair, and the construct of equity describes something else. And here's two very simple cartoons to show you the difference between equality, which is treating everyone the same, which means that some people don't have access to equal opportunities. How important is that? And this is what is involved in equity. It's actually giving people the resources and the support that they need to have those equal opportunities. And in developing a culture of well-being in school, that applies to teachers, community, parents, and students. And this is what's happening in a lot of our schools at the moment, and I'm sure some of you will have seen this. Same thing for everybody. Okay. So this, for me, is the bit that actually comes to the heart of what we need to do in terms of changing our educational culture and our school culture. All students need basic skills because they need them to navigate the world they're in. Of course they need to know how to read and write and use technology. But we are all so wonderfully unique. And an education system that is fit for the 21st century would develop those wonderful, unique, individual strengths, interests, to enable them to have critical thinking and to engage with learning. And that's only possible with a different set of beliefs, policies, and pedagogies. It's not that I am aiming low here in terms of changing education. I'm thinking about how much we need to change in order to meet the needs of our kids and the needs of this century that they are in. We don't need everybody to pass exams at a high level. We don't need everybody to be doctors, lawyers, merchant bankers. We need people to be proud of being garbage collectors, proud of being lorry drivers, proud especially of people being care workers. We know how much we relied on key workers in the pandemic. And for a little while, people were sort of saying, oh, aren't they wonderful? But they're still getting paid rubbish because we don't value them properly. And at the moment, we only truly value a percentage of our population who reach academic excellence. So what do our children need to learn to create the world we want to live in? They need to feel valued. We need to be thinking about how we might develop personal bests so that people are competing against themselves. We need to focus on what we have in common. What is our shared humanity, and how can our children learn it and demonstrate it? And that picture is of an important race where one of the runners held back from winning that race in order to help their colleague. Winning was less important than their shared humanity. And what do we tell so many of our kids? Winning is what is most important. And in fact, I've seen that on a more personal level, where I was actually at a cross-country race with the son of a friend of mine. And we were waiting sort of by the finishing line. And we waited and people came in and people came in and people came in. And we were saying, where's Ewan? Where's Ewan? And it turns out that one of his friends, who was asthmatic, was having a bit of breathing problems. So he stayed with him for all of the race to make sure that he was going to be okay. And I'm thinking that young man has learnt some perspectives on life and on other people that are going to stay with him, hopefully, throughout his adult life. We need our young people to learn relational skills and perspectives. And I've heard Dora already talk about the importance of social and emotional learning. There are pillars of learning to do, learning to know, the knowledge and skills in the curriculum, but equally important is learning to be and learning to live together. And I'm not the only one saying that. That's the OECD framework has that as well. It also includes learning to transform ourselves and the world we live in. Our children need to know ways to contribute, because how important that is for their well-being. And it starts in schools. How can our children have agency in schools? How can they include everybody in schools? And this is what they are actually, in many places, learning about what's important. They are learning that it's most important to pass exams and get a high grade. And the definition of success is having more than other people, having a bigger house, a bigger car, more stuff, more bling. My view about that is, how much bling can you wear at any one time? Not a lot, you know. How many amazing clothes can you wear at any one time? We don't need all the stuff. And if there wasn't anyone to show it off to, would we still want it? And we've learned that some people are more worthy than others. And in a perspective of shared humanity, we are all equally worthy in our own unique way. Now, we've talked a lot over this conference about the importance of evidence. And I'd be an idiot not to say how important that is. But people, by and large, don't do things on the basis of evidence. If they did things on the basis of evidence, we wouldn't be in the terrible state we are now with climate change. People do things on the basis of belief and what makes sense to them. And you will not change anybody's minds about anything if you tell them they got it wrong. And what's more, you're right. And for me, if you're going to change belief, you need to do it in one of two ways. Multiple mediated experiences. And I'll use the example of climate change. It's not just the weather events that are happening, because people have been saying for a long time, weather is weather. But are now being discussed in terms of anthropomorphic climate change, what we are actually doing to change the climate. And it's in conversations all around the place, in the media, in politics, etc. And for me, and this comes back again to what we're talking about in terms of culture, conversations create culture. What we say to each other, not just in that conversation, you know, over a cup of coffee, just one or two people, but conversations that we are saying now. This is a big conversation about moving from the me to the we. We need to be very aware of the words that we're using, and the words that we need to be using need to be louder, stronger, and more dominant. So how do you get an idea to become mainstream? You hook into what people really want. People want to feel good. They want to have purpose and being connected. We need a counterculture. We have a culture of individualism and greed and low ethics. We need a counterculture for well-being. And when that happens, we'll sort of get everybody going in the same direction. And those people will either get on or get off the train that's going. And it's building the little things. It's not just about policies, it's what happens in all the thousands of interactions that happen day in, day out, in a school, in a family. and being aware of that. And that's just a quote from an Alexander McCall Smith book, and I love it. Acts of tea, acts of love, acts of laughter, the small things that count. And just to finish, you, because of all those small things as well as the big policies, you will never know the difference that you make. Thank you.